Hey, and welcome back to KneeToKnee, the podcast where we explore how connections impact every part of our health and who we are, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I'm your host, Mark Merritt, and today's guest is Olaolu Ogunyemi. He also goes by Lou. Lou is a proud U.S. Marine officer and an award-winning author, and the founder of Parent-Child Connect. His upcoming book, Lead Last, along with his own story of overcoming adversity, has made him a powerful voice for parents and leaders who want to raise confident kids and lead with lasting purpose. In this episode, Lou breaks down his Lead Last philosophy, a framework built on knowing yourself, knowing your people, and knowing your environment before you ever try to lead. We talk about how he applied it as a young Marine officer, as a husband, and as a father, often learning the hard way. We also dig into strategic vulnerability, the closed door policy, and what parents can do today to build real connection with their kids. If you are someone trying to lead better at home or at work, this one's for you. Now, before we jump in, if this episode speaks to you, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a conversation. And when you're done listening, drop a comment and tell us, how do you stay connected with your kids, whether they're still little or full-grown adults out in the world? Those stories matter, and we genuinely want to hear them. Now, let's get knee to knee with Lou. Welcome, everybody, for another episode of Knee to Knee. And I know I say this all the time, and some of you have laughed at me in comments back to me, but I am excited about who we have today. I say that quite often. I'm excited, or I'm super excited. But yes, today I'm excited. I've had some really good conversations with our guest, and so I want to introduce you. I'm going to read this about him, and yes, he's going to laugh at me in a second, but you'll all understand why. Joining us today on our podcast is Olaolu. Okay. Oh man, Ogunyemi. Ogunyemi?
That actually is pretty good. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Hey, your Googling worked out for you.
I'm like, okay, wait a second. Remember what Mama Google said. He actually goes by Lou, which really was a relief for me when he told me that. He's a proud U.S. Marine officer. He's an award-winning author of Crow from the Shadow and the founder of Parent-Child Connect. Through his upcoming book, Lead Last, and his own story of overcoming adversity, Lou equips parents and leaders with practical, faith-filled strategies to raise confident kids and lead with lasting purpose. Lou, man, so welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, Mark, thanks so much for having me. And I've been excited ever since I first met you a few weeks ago. So I'm really excited to dive in and have another conversation with you.
Yeah, we did. We had a great conversation a couple weeks back, really kind of getting an idea of getting to know each other a little bit. But I mean, really what I'm curious, we're just going to jump right in. And so talk to me about, what does leading last mean? We mentioned that in the introduction, so that you focus on leading last. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to tell you that I came up with that quote. It really came from a quote, "He who laughs last laughs best." Sorry, I always struggle to say that. It's like a tongue twister. But I changed it to, "He who leads last leads best." And the way we look at that, all we're saying is that there are things that you need to do first before you can be an effective leader. And those three things are: get to know yourself, you have to get to know the people you're leading, and get to know the environment you're leading in, so you can create a culture for self-starters and innovators. And that's really what Lead Last is all about. You do those things so you become an effective leader, so you can leave a lasting impact on the organization you're in.
Well, that's awesome. We changed our focus. Those of you that have been paying attention, we changed our focus recently, and just instead of the whole wide range of whoever, we're focusing more on the men side, trying to bring some good content to men. And so I'm really curious about how you're applying that lead last as a father and as a husband and even as an officer in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, trial and error. That's what I'll say all the time. First and foremost, and sometimes I should say error and error and error, and then hopefully a little bit of correction and learning. And so that's really what it is. You take that philosophy of getting to know yourself, and it took me a while to learn this, but I'll start with like my fatherhood. So as a father, I came in the picture, came up with 3 other brothers, and we're very close in age, 2 older sisters that almost act like my second and third mom, but very close-knit family. But because there were 4 boys close in age, we always clashed. And so we just had basically a short attention span, or at least a short span for how long we held grudges. And so in my mind, when we clash, it'll be plus maybe 30 minutes, hour tops, and we're back to normal. We don't care anymore. And I took that
Right.
same philosophy and tried to apply it to parenting and marriage. And I can tell you what, I couldn't have been more wrong than ever in my life. And I had to learn that first lesson is that you have to be able to understand who you are in context and then understand how that style fits your home, your household. And that was one of my biggest problems. I was trying to apply something that worked for my brothers and our relationship with my wife, and at the time, my oldest daughter, who, when I graduated from college, I was 22 years old, married with a 3-year-old. And so I was very young parenting, very young husband, and I'm trying to apply something that worked with my brothers. Yeah, I knew that was a recipe for failure. And so I would say that was the first thing. You gotta know who you are.
The only reason I'm laughing is I have 4 brothers.
Mhm.
Right. And you just can't apply what happens between the guys with our wives. That's the first thing my wife will say is, I'm so glad you guys don't treat us like you do the brothers.
And the funny thing is, you would think that's intuitive, right? But quite honestly, when I talk to a lot of guys out there, especially young guys, they're like, "Yeah, are you supposed to be my best friend?" Are you talking about your wife? Yeah, they're supposed to be my best friend. And yeah, just make sure that you understand that person. Like, if you're marrying that person, you got to get to know her. And that's the same thing with every leadership, the same with parenting. And these are lessons that I had to learn, even in the Marine Corps. Getting to know your Marines and understand how to make them the best version of themselves is truly important, because if you try that one size fits all approach, the same way we're talking about with, the boys to the wife, if you try that mess, you're going to fail miserably. And I think that's really what it really boils down to. And then the other thing is getting to know, like, what are the things that you may have learned early on. Like, for me, it was learning that Major Payne-esque style of leadership, which, quite frankly, that was one of the only Marines I knew before I joined the Marine Corps. It was him and Gunny Ermey from Full Metal Jacket. So I didn't know any Marine.
Talk about 2 opposite perspectives.
So I mean, that's what I learned. I come in the Marine Corps, I was like, yeah, that's the kind of leader I'm going to be. So when I became operations officer, an executive officer, oh man, I was tearing people up, and that was my goal. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna light them up, get them in line, make sure they're accomplishing the CEO's mission. And it was nowhere close to who I was as a person. And so I just had to learn that, man, you have to learn how to truly be who you are. Like, embrace the style, embrace the culture, and know where we're working. Obviously, I'm a United States Marine, so I have to understand that environment, understand the culture, and really know the mission. But at the same time, you have to still be yourself within that context and that culture. And that's some of the lessons I learned, really, that I think came from that lead last philosophy, even when I didn't name it. But yeah, now I know that that's really, really what it's about. It's really about leading last. And I think that's how I am able to apply it in my workspace and at home.
It's interesting. You mentioned that, and hang on just a second here. Grabbing a book off my shelf here. You made me think of this book. Have you read this book yet?
I have. Yep.
And those of you that are listening, it's a book by L. David Marquette. He's a retired U.S. Navy captain, called Turn the Ship Around. And he applied a lot of these similar, you talk about lead last. He did a lot of that when he was working with the crew. So those of you that don't know, I'll give a real brief synopsis. He was assigned to a submarine at the last minute. He was supposed to be on a different one, trained there, got assigned to a different submarine, and they had the worst record in the submarine corps, or I don't know what they call it, to be honest with you. So sorry, Captain. You know, but they had the worst record, especially for those that were enlisted to come back, for officers to stay on. I mean, it was horrible. And he turned it into, within a relatively short period of time, it seemed to me that he actually turned it into the highest ranked submarine crew in the Navy. And applying some of these kind of this lead last, like I'd not made that connection until you mentioned that. It was like, oh my gosh, this was a great book.
Yeah, and that was one of the people I actually reached out to first thing when I connected on LinkedIn, when I was taking my notes. Ironically, a lot of my notes that I took were on a ship, because I really believe that on deployment on a ship really is the opportunity to see who people really are. When the power's out on a ship,
Yeah.
and I don't know, I'm assuming they have similar problems on submarine. I've never been on one. Never aspire to be. No disrespect to the captain or any
No.
submariners out there. Not my thing. But on the ship, there's many things that you go through. It's always like fast-paced things happening, and then nothing happens, right? So you tend to have people who have this Groundhog Day approach to life. Everybody starts feeling their own way, and so you get an opportunity to truly get to know people out there. And I was just on there in some ways, which I always encourage people to do. I was just out there journaling, taking notes. What's working well? What's not working well? Taking notes about myself, taking notes about my buddies, my CEO at the time, all these people I'm really like learning from and trying to figure out, okay, what is this leadership all about? And what are all the things that, Lieutenant Lou messed up a few years ago that he wished that he would have known? And I happened to be mentoring some younger officers at the time. And as I came to all these
Yeah.
conclusions, I started reading books like what you're talking about, Turn the Ship Around, Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I read Team of Teens. Right. There's a lot of books out there I started reading and studying that I already had most of them on the shelf. And I'm like, man, this thing actually makes sense. This stuff is proven by what we're talking about. But now it's just trying to bring all those philosophies and those leadership practices and characteristics back to our emerging leaders. So that way we can actually learn from this stuff and hopefully that we can grow from it.
I think that's the biggest thing is that, I mean, number one, we have to be able to see where we are. I love the fact that you were journaling and you were making notes and just being observant around you to see what was going on. And finding those things that what worked, what didn't work. But I think taking that, well, that's all well and good because a lot of us can do that or do that to an extent, but it's to taking that and turning it into practice. That's the most difficult part. So how were you able to take those things that you learned on when you were deployed? How were you able to take those things and actually move those into practice? So it wasn't just, I've written some really cool stuff.
Yeah, great question. So one in particular, I call it the closed door policy. And I know it really ruffles a lot of feathers, and I don't care. Because the way I look at it is trying to find a way to be more efficient with your time and more deliberate in how you're passing information and talking to people. And what I found is that a lot of leaders, especially young leaders, are allowing a lot of things to come in and out of their office, a lot of distractions, a lot of gossip, a lot of drama, and all this stuff going in and out of the office. So much so that they're not even able to focus and maintain their field of view on the bigger picture. And so I always tell people to try the closed door policy. And so what I did is, I wrote the stuff down. I came up with this philosophy and these 21 principles. And I was like, all right, so principle one, I'm going to try this, right? And I went and tried it, right? So, and I went through and did those things just like I'm describing. And the biggest thing is once you take those principles, obviously you have to modify it. So my closed door policy at the time, I closed the door several times. But what I forgot at one point is that I always had like this meeting. Now I broke time in the middle of the day, usually early in the morning. We had like a breakfast together, me and my staff non-commissioned officer. We would sit down and we'll just enjoy like our light breakfast together. He'll have like a banana and maybe I'll have an apple and we'll just sort of talk about what's going on. I sort of forgot about that when I closed my door and it was almost like, hey, are you getting dressed or something? He did it a couple of times and I'm like, why does he keep coming? Oh yeah, that's right. You're implementing your closed
Yeah,
door
this
policy.
is our time. Yeah.
Right. You scheduled this for a reason so you guys could have a chance to level set before you go out and talk to the Marines. But that is just fine. It's just go ahead and do it. And that's what I always encourage people to do. It's not going to break the company if you try something different. So just apply the principle. You see it, you try it, you apply it. And if it doesn't work, then you modify it to work the context and environment that you're in.
One thing that I've done it with one of my teams and I did just recently was, we came up with these similar type principle things. Look, we're going to try something new. I think having a vulnerability with your team and saying, we're going to try something new. Please give me some feedback if this is working or not. Because if I'm just going at it with a myopic view, right? I could be missing something that's so key. And I think that so happens whether you're on a ship or whether you're in the office place or even at home. You've got to be able to have that, what's working, what isn't, and then we can tweak it and adjust it. You talked about fail, and maybe win a little bit, right? That whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you use that word vulnerability, especially for men out there, because a lot of times we feel
Yes.
sort of weird about that word because we're like, wow, vulnerability. And I understand it, right? Vulnerability, when you look at the dictionary definition, it doesn't seem like something that a strong, confident man
Yeah,
wants to do.
I don't want to do that.
Right. I mean, it's just realistic. But in reality, I always tell people I equate it to sports, especially if we're talking to men. And so you think about football, if there's a vulnerability on your line, nobody's going to go out there and tell everybody, hey, hey man, O lineman right here is injured. No, you're just going to find a way to plug that gap. You're probably going to put a fullback or somebody behind him to help support him. So that way you plug the gap and you go ahead and win the game. And that's how you have to start looking at vulnerabilities. It's an opportunity, as you're talking about, for feedback. It's an opportunity to grow. It's an opportunity to understand. And that's truly what vulnerability, and I call it strategic vulnerability, is all about. It's truly
Yeah, that's
revealing
a good,
those
yeah.
areas where you can now have some growth by telling somebody, hey, here's the gap that we have internally. Here's what I'm trying to do. And here's where I want you to plug that gap. And really, in this case, plugging the gap is just feedback. And I think that's one way to look at vulnerabilities.
And I think that, and I think you're exactly right. There are so many people that look at vulnerability as a bad thing because we've been trained that way, right? But I like the way you phrased it as a strategic vulnerability. That's a different feel to it because now I'm intentional about what I'm doing with this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing is if we, and most times it's us changing words. Sometimes I tell people maybe it is an argument of semantics, but whatever it takes for us to start applying these things better,
Right.
then I think it's important because again, as men, we try to have this protective thing that, as you said, we're trained to do it. In the Marine Corps, we actually call it a critical vulnerability when you're looking at adversary, and it's not the DoD in general. When you're talking about looking at how to exploit something, you look for the vulnerability so you can exploit. So, of course, we're going to want to protect our vulnerabilities. But in reality, we have to understand that a lot of those vulnerabilities are being shared internally. So that way you can grow internally. You're not going on YouTube. And I think that's one of the problems that you have this pendulum swing and you go on YouTube and you start doing this whatever you think showing vulnerability. That's not it. That ain't it. Vulnerability is
That's a
sharing.
whole, that's social media is
Yeah,
not not the right
100%.
thing.
That's
Yeah,
not how
yeah,
that's
yeah.
not sharing vulnerability. That's you just trying to get attention. But being vulnerable is actually doing something for growth. That's what strategic vulnerability is about.
Yeah, we had an episode a little while ago with a former medic pilot for EMS pilot, and he actually his name is Jesse Munns, and it was an episode we had a bit ago, and his story was just a fascinating story where he was talking. You know, he was struggling with a lot of things in life, and then finally at one point. And they, as a pilot, you can't say much of anything because then they don't let you fly, right?
Mm,
So
mhm.
he was like, in that culture, you can't say anything, you can't tell anybody you're having any kind of struggle emotionally, mentally, whatever, because then that causes a problem. And so he finally opened up to another pilot and said, "How are you doing?" He goes, "Man, I'm not doing good." And that kind of helped break the dam for him as well. That he was able to start work. He actually works with other pilots now, helping them through some of this stuff and helping. And so the same kind of thing where you've got to be able to break that dam a little bit because we have been conditioned is the word I was looking for, conditioned to it means a certain thing and we got to avoid that. But I think it's important, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about the let's talk a little bit about the parent child connect. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Parent Child Connect actually came from me wanting to provide resources or find a way to connect my own children. And so it started off as a book series. I legitimately was just going to write the book Crow from the Shadow for my family, and we are just going to sit down and read it together, just so we could say we did something. But then I remembered a lot of the guys I grew up with back home, and a lot of them didn't have a father in the home. And those who had their mothers around, a lot of them were busy and they're trying to work multiple jobs and keep the lights on and stuff like that. And so I figured that why not be able to provide that same book that I had for these fathers and these mothers out here so they can have some way to connect with their children. And that's really where the Parent Child Connect book series came from. And later, the Parent Child Connect brand in general really is there to provide resources to parents, teachers, mentor, caregivers, really anybody who works with children for them to establish teachable and memorable experiences. So we're just trying to help them create connections so that way we can help them grow through whatever the circumstances are because it's really about influence. We know that there's plenty of influences out there, and we're trying to get into their space so we can influence them
In the right way.
in the right way.
Right.
That's
So
right.
exactly. Exactly. Because there's plenty of influence going on, but let's just make sure it's the right place.
That's
So
right.
how many books are there in the Parent Child Connect collection? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So there are 3 books. Like I said, the first is called Crow from the Shadow. That one is really talking about not allowing the shadow, which I loosely define as a person, place, thing, anything that stops you from achieving your purpose, not allowing that
Okay.
to distract you from achieving your purpose. The next one's called Billy Dipper's Time to Shine. It's really talking about self worth, knowing that you bring value to the world around you. And then the last one is probably my favorite to read for younger children. It's called Horace the Horsefly. And actually, it's one of the It's one a story that's really talking about animal sounds and sight words. Really has no the theme in there is friendliness and enjoying each other, but it doesn't have the same kind of themes as the other two. But it's really for those younger readers to get them excited about reading.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to make sure that we put links up for our listeners. I'm fascinated by what you put together. That's pretty awesome. So, tell me what would be something that parents can do today to help their kids overcome insecurity?
Yeah, so the first thing is you have to find common ground. And one of the hardest parts, it depends on how old they are. If they are very young, it's going to be a lot easier. You can get into their space, you can read with them, you can watch movies with them. Most times they want to be closer. And so it's a lot easier to establish those connective moments. If they're older, let's talk about teenagers because I have a widespread. My oldest is 16, my youngest is 7. And so we talk about teenagers now, and you start to have to figure out how to get into their world, understand what they're interested in, and then you have to spend some time doing that. And I'm not saying that you have to go out, and I always tell parents this: don't go out and start being a TikTok influencer, saying that you're trying to connect your child. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying though is know what they're truly like their true hobbies, and if they don't have hobbies, let's start working towards helping them create some healthy hobbies that aren't scrolling on a phone or whatever it may be. So truly get into their space and try to understand who they are as a person. Because really what we're talking about here is building a relationship. And we look at it, it's hard to look at it that way sometimes because, I'm the parent, I'm the dad, I know what's better. And sometimes our directions are completely different because, as they said on Matilda, I never was a child, so they're just dirty, rotten kids. But in reality, like we truly have to be able to influence them because they're working through the same struggles that we work through with the other complications of added technology and information at their fingertips. So I would say that's the biggest thing. Get into the world, find a common ground, the things that you guys can enjoy. I think there should be some flexibility there. I would say probably 80% of the time, in my opinion, you try to find a joint activity you enjoy. And then 10% of the time, they need to do something that you enjoy, and 10% you do something they enjoy. So maybe you'll be finding yourself playing video games. If you don't play, then it's okay. Just find yourself into their world and getting to know them. So that way you can have a connection with them and guide them through those moments of insecurity.
You know, and that's really good advice. I can't help but think about, and I've said this, and our listeners have heard me say this before when it comes to something my father told me when I was a young dad, and I remember he and I having this conversation, and he said, Mark, every year we had to get to know the new person
Mm,
because as these kids grow, they're changing, they're going through adolescent and early teenage, and then teenage, and every year because of hormones and growth and all the stuff that goes on with them. It's almost like they're a different person to a degree every year. And so I remember my dad saying, be patient. Every year is like a new year. You just realize you got to get to know the new kid.
mm.
And that actually really helped.
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice because really, as we know, I mean, humans change, right? Our interests change, and especially as young adults, as you're trying to find yourself and find your identity. I'll give an example. I had a mohawk. I know my hair is cut short now. I'm a Marine. I have to. But at one point, I had a mohawk and I spiked it up right on top of my head with some axe, like holding gel or something like that. My dad hated it. And right, I still don't know to this day why I did it. But in reality, I believe it was just me trying to find myself, find my identity, who I am. And show that to your father's advice. I mean, I think that's phenomenal advice. You have to get to know who that person is. You have to get to understand why they're doing the things they're doing. And sometimes the answer is they don't even know. So you got to be okay with that answer and know that there's all kinds of, we already talked about it, all kinds of influences out there that are right at their fingertips. So where we had, just going to school, and I told my kids, I even had dial up growing up, and I'm not that old. I had dial up, and there's no way I was going to search and get the information the way they get it today. But they have instant information, instant influences, and they have the constant need to try to change who they are based on what they're seeing outside your four walls. So I think it's important that we truly spend some time getting to know who that human is every single day that we have an opportunity to. It gets exhausting at times, and sometimes they say and do things that are crazy. But to be honest with you, I don't think they say or do anything that's more crazy than what I did at their age. So I'd say have some patience with them and truly get to know them.
Yeah, definitely. I will have to say I chuckled a little bit when you said you had a mohawk. And the reason I did is because our son, who was a Marine, when he got out of the Corps, a little while later, he shows up with a mohawk. It's like, okay. So when you said that, I'm like,
I don't know what maybe it's the Mr. T influence from the 18. Maybe that's what it is,
I
you know.
maybe that's what it was, but it was you said that and I kind of went, okay, I got to call Zach. So, well, we're kind of wrapping up on our time here. So I'm going to wrap up with our last question that we always ask all of our guests is, what is one thing that our listeners can do today to build deeper connections with those around them?
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to say, or the one thing I'll say, is connect with yourself first. And the way you do that is invest in four key areas, 10 minutes a day in four key areas. That's in physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. I tell everybody first thing in the morning, invest that time in there. So if you can't do it sequentially, you don't have 40 minutes first thing in the morning, then try to stack some of those things together. Go on a walk and meditate and listen to music, or do something to try to build your physical, mental, psyche, and everything else, because that's truly important. You can't really connect with others if you haven't spent time sort of building yourself up and connecting with yourself. So that's the one thing I always tell people is find some time today, or really tomorrow morning, I guess, to
Yeah.
invest in yourself and grow.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And Lou, thank you. Man, I so appreciate it. I hope we can keep continuing conversations together, you and I. I have really enjoyed our time today. And thank you all of our listeners for tuning in for another episode of KneeToKnee. We appreciate the time and effort that you spend listening and learning from some of our amazing guests like Lou. So thank you again, Lou. And for all of you out there, sure appreciate you coming, and we'll catch you on the next go around. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you.